So imagine a judge that was appointed by a drug lord. Who are those judges? Who are the ones who finance their campaigns? Who are the politicians behind those candidates? So what sort of justice?
Some of my colleagues and students who believe that a lot of the projects regarding regional integration in Latin America are effectively copied from Europe.
The problems are different. The needs are different. And above all, the resources are limited. Mayors travel to other cities, have learned from both Curitiba in Brazil and Medellin in Colombia.
How does Mexico see its own position within the Americas?
This threat coming from Trump is uniting Mexican and Canadian citizens.
You're making a fascinating case for, rediscovering the historical roots of Mexico as inspiration for its foreign policy strategy and its positioning. Welcome to New Regional Orders, a podcast by the Center for Regional Integration. I'm your host and the Center's founding director, Ivo Ganchev. On this episode of the show, I present to you the second part of my two-part conversation with Dr. Octavio Gonzalez Segovia from FLACSO-México, the Mexican branch of a prestigious Latin American intergovernmental research organization. In the previous episode, I spoke to Octavio about his academic research, and we focused on topics such as transgovernmental networks and health governance. But as I mentioned in his introduction on the previous episode, Octavio has had a broad range of experiences, including teaching at numerous universities, traveling across several continents, and working with Mexican ministries. This is why it was a pleasure for me to talk to him again about a broader range of topics, including whether the European Union serves as a model for Latin American regional organizations, what are the key trends in Mexican politics today, why they matter, and why we should be paying attention to the recent judicial reform in Mexico, how is the changing foreign policy approach of the US under the leadership of President Donald Trump perceived in Mexico and Latin America at large, and also what are Octavio's key recommendations in terms of movies, series, poems, and other creative resources that can help us better understand Latin American politics. I truly enjoyed this conversation, and if you enjoy it as well, don't forget to like and subscribe on my YouTube channel or on your favorite podcasting platform. Now let's roll the intro and get started. Welcome to the show.
Ivo Ganchev, Beijing-based academic, executive, and a consultant.
I wanted to try a theory on you.
Mira, esa es una pregunta para un examen de grado.
Go to the communities and listen to people,
Exploring change across the borders. Welcome to New Regional Orders.
So there is a narrative in the academic literature which effectively regards as the EU as the model for regional integration, as the allegedly most advanced regional organization in the world that other countries are seeking to effectively emulate. As a result of this preconception, there are some of my colleagues and students who believe that a lot of the initiatives or projects regarding regional integration in Latin America are effectively copied from Europe or adapted from the experience of the European Union. In your view, to what extent is this true, and who do Latin American countries and regional organizations seek to learn from when they're looking for inspiration in terms of launching new initiatives?
Of course, it varies, and there's, of course, a sort of admiration towards the European Union integration process. And we could see some examples that took inspiration from AU institutions such as the Central American Parliament, but there are as well many particularities throughout Latin America. We have different regions which are different when compared to each other. Therefore, the problems are different. The needs are different. And above all, the resources are limited. Taking that into account, you'll see various arrangements which diverge from the ones we observe in the European Union. And it's not that within the Latin American organizations there are mechanisms to, for example, compensate the poorest regions of certain countries in order to bring all countries to the same level of development. There isn't such a thing. So most of the times, cooperation depends on the willingness and the resources of those who propose the initiatives. And most of the times, those countries are Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia. That is the big countries in Latin America, the biggest economies. And of course, we need to take into account that the degree of development within Latin America varies also a lot. You have some Caribbean islands which have a high standard of living, which have, for example, when it comes to dealing with epidemics, more hospitals and beds in hospitals than the majority of Latin American countries. You have countries that are located in the Amazons and which have to confront tropical diseases, whereas those who live on arid areas confront different threats. And not only talking about health-related threats, but also climate change threats or weather conditions that changes everything. So what it happens is that since the degree of development and the resources are more or less the same between these big economies, they tend to copy practices from the other country. That was the case, for example, of the public transportation system that was first conceived in Curitiba in Brazil, and then this idea and the whole setup of the system traveled to Bogota, and there it became the Transmillennium Network. And from there it traveled to Mexico, Ecuador, etc. And from Mexico City, it traveled to the other major cities within Mexico. Nowadays, the majority of the biggest cities in Latin America have a similar system. Not only the majority of the Brazilian cities and Colombian cities and Mexican cities, but cities across the region. What I have witnessed is that mayors travel to other cities on a sort of business trip, learn from the best practices of those cities regarded as the most advanced in Latin America. And from there, thanks, of course, due to the proximity, the cultural proximity, the same language, And the proximity as well, in terms of problems, the problems are more or less the same. We all need to deal with drug trafficking. We all need to deal with poverty. We all need to deal with similar diseases and so on and so forth. We all have limited capacities. So this particular form of transportation became the alternative when you don't have lots of resources. Because if you want to buy a subway line, you need 20 times more money than when building a Metrobus line or a Transmillennium line, call it the way you wish. And besides, you can show off that Metrobus within a year, which is, we all know what politicians want, to show something before they finish their mandates in order to become re-elected or to be elected into a different position, let's say as a governor of a region or department. So I would say, to sum up, that it is geographical proximity, it is cultural proximity, it is the common language, but it's also the amount of resources that make Latin American countries cooperate with each other and devise very particular solutions to the very particular problems we confront in Latin America.
So if you follow this logic and you look at the Latin American countries, who learns from who? What are some countries that often learn from each other that would be examples of this?
Well, when it comes to urbanization and urban planning in general, transportation systems, many cities in Latin America have learned from both Curitiba in Brazil and Medellin in Colombia. They are regarded as very good examples of urban planning. When we talk about big cities tend to learn from the practices and the implementation ways of other major cities. For example, Mexico City learns from Sao Paulo. Mexico City learns from Shanghai, from Beijing, from Delhi and Mumbai, and they are all linked through different kinds of networks. And of course, there is communication between the big metropolis in Europe and the big metropolis in Latin America. Although what it happens with the Latin American cities, which are called global cities, is that they tend to learn more from those massive cities that are facing similar problems. In that sense, I'm referring to cities that are in the global south. Because it doesn't really make sense to learn from the practices of Paris or Naples if you don't have the resources Paris has, or if you have a different weather or different conditions in general. You focus more on learning from those who have managed to deal with, let's say, pollution or any other major threats, like, for example, Beijing and Mexico City. We are talking about not only similar problems, but it's also the magnitude of the problem that makes these politicians, these civil servants, to establish links. Of course, the culture and the language is a barrier. And again, that's the reason why Latin American leaders prefer to collaborate with Latin American politicians. And of course, there have been links in place for decades. And not only links, but also common membership in different organizations, different regional and American organizations.
Now, since we're in Mexico today, let's take a moment to discuss the country's role within the Americas. Now, Mexico has ties to North America, Central America, South America, Latin America, depending on how you define the regions and their scope here. How does Mexico see its own position within the Americas? How would you say that Mexico defines itself and positions itself within the political landscape of the broader regions of the Americas?
Well, nowadays, and that applied also to the previous government, that is the one led by Andrés Manuel López Obrador. The government sees itself as an important member of the Latin American and Caribbean community. It sees itself as a regional leader of a region that comprises Central America, the Caribbean, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. But when it comes to the whole of Latin America, Mexico sees itself as a member, but not necessarily the country that should lead or that should always take the initiative, irrespective of the issue area. And of course, there is a competition, a historic competition with Brazil. Therefore, since ages, Argentina and Mexico have allied to confront Brazil's aspirations, particularly within the United Nations. And more specifically, within the UN Security Council. As you know, Brazil has always wanted to occupy a permanent seat in the Security Council. Historically, Argentina and Mexico, as the regional challengers, have opposed and have joined forces in order to propose an alternative. And the alternative in that case is to hold a temporary seat that might be distributed throughout the whole region. That is, at times, a Caribbean country will represent the whole of the region, and at times, a Central American country, and other 3 years, a South American country, and so on and so forth. I would say this position, the Mexican position within Latin America, and the place Mexico regards it deserves or it should occupy, has varied throughout history. There have been times in which Mexican governments have opted to retreat. And that was the case of the government led by Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He believed that the best foreign policy was domestic policy, and of course was a stupidity. A country like Mexico cannot simply escape globalization, cannot retreat. We are a very open economy. We rely on our linkages with the US, Canada, Europe, Latin America, but also Asia. Mexico receives millions of tourists on a yearly basis. Just on the previous year, Mexico got around 45 million. So it's one of the most important touristic destinations worldwide, but it's also a major trading partner. Mexico supplies not only fruits and vegetables to different regions, but also cars, car components, airplane components, computers, fridges, stoves, electrodomestics in general, medical equipment, very sophisticated medical equipment, medicine, etc. So no Mexican government should forget about this fact, should forget that Mexican companies are also everywhere, even in Southeast Asia, like Cemex in Indonesia, or Cinepolis in India. You cannot escape this reality. And therefore, there is not only the need to trade with all countries, regions, etc., but to cooperate with all possible and relevant actors, as Mexico is doing with MICTA, with the MICTA countries, with Indonesia, South Korea, Australia, Turkey. Even if they are so far away from us, we're talking about regional leaders in their respective regions. We are talking about countries that, despite not sharing core values or ideologies, still cooperate and reach common positions in very important topics. And they arrive with those common positions to the United Nations agencies. That's an example of how collaboration could and should evolve, despite diverging interests, despite different allegiances, and despite belonging to different regions. The BRICS countries are another example. We're talking about countries in different continents with different values, ideologies, but still similar interests. And one of those interests is to change the balance of power, change the distribution of power within international organizations. And in that sense, a country like Mexico can play a pivotal role due to its belonging to different regions. And because, after all, Mexico is at the crossroads between Asia, Europe, North America, the Caribbean, and Latin America. Historically, Mexico has always been a bridge between regions. That was the case during the colonial times, in which trade between Asia, particularly East Asia, and Europe was conducted through Mexico, at that time the New Spain, through the ports of Acapulco and Veracruz. There was a regular shipment from Manila to Acapulco. From Acapulco, the goods were carried to Veracruz port, and from there, the merchandises were taken to Sevilla. And from there, the goods were distributed throughout Europe. And that's the reason why, for example, Mexico at that time was the first country worldwide that negotiated a fair trade agreement with Japan. And those historical backgrounds cemented cooperation in many ways. And there are countries like Japan, which do not forget the fact that Mexico was the first country worldwide that negotiated and signed an equal treatment, unlike the previous treatments the Japanese government signed with the Europeans. And it was due to those historical ties of friendship that the Japanese government signed a trade agreement, a very comprehensive trade agreement with Mexico in 1994. And that treaty became in practice some years later, at the beginning of the 21st century. And that's one example that collaboration is possible even among different regions, even between countries which are entirely different. And that's thanks to the position Mexico holds, the geographic position. And that geographic position as well enabled the country to become the first trading partner of the US. And that position, that position enables Mexico to have a voice in multiple fora, like CARICOM with the Caribbean countries, or with the European Union. The European Union also signed many years ago a trade, economic, and political agreement, because it's also political, with Mexico, being one of the very few worldwide with which negotiated and signed such a comprehensive agreement. So if the current government plays its cards well and realizes that we have no escape, that we have to serve as a bridge between different regions, to expand horizons, to diversify our relationships, Mexico is called to occupy a more active role in world negotiations. But for that, you need involvement, which I believe Claudia Sheinbaum has done relatively well, unlike her predecessor, who never went to an APEC meeting or to a G20 meeting.
You're making a fascinating case for, rediscovering the historical roots of Mexico as inspiration for its foreign policy strategy and its positioning in the region of the Americas and the world more broadly. And I hope that some of the Mexican policymakers listen to this conversation, because they might discover some interesting ideas to build on in their upcoming foreign policy adjustments. Now, we've also seen some recent shifts in the dynamics of the Americas and North America in particular, with the new Trump administration's foreign policy, which has been much more assertive than before. We saw added tariffs on Mexico and Canada almost right from the beginning of this administration, and of course this is an evolving story that's ongoing, but how is this sort of move by Trump and any potential other assertive policies, how are they perceived here in Mexico? And how do you think that the country should respond to these types of changes in U.S. foreign policy?
In general, those movements and policies were negatively perceived by both the public and the leaders. The positive thing is that despite natural political cleavages, these threats united most of the political parties against Trump and against his ambitions. Of course, there were dissenting voices, political voices who profited from the moment. But in general, Trump's attacks united the country. And due to that, the popularity of President Sheinbaum even increase. It was already very high. It was at a level of 70%, and nowadays it's around 80%. I believe the strategy she has adopted so far is the best one any Mexican leader could adopt. Our margin of action is limited due to the amount of exports we send to the US on a yearly basis. About 84% of our trade is conducted with the US. So a 25% increase on tariffs would be a disaster for an economy that is totally linked to the US economy. Something similar, as you know, happens with the Canadian economy. In general, I praise Sheinbaum's strategy, Sheinbaum's cold-blooded strategy. Cabeza fría, that's how she named that strategy, and in fact, she called other leaders in Latin America to follow suit, to adopt the same strategy. I think that strategy has been relatively effective. However, I would add some warnings, and not only to Trump's administration, but also to businessmen in the US. If you impose a 25% on our steel and aluminum exports, we'll do the same with our imports of steel and aluminum. And in that case, we have the upper hand because Mexico imports more steel and aluminum from the US than the amounts of steel and aluminum we export to the US. In that sense, I think our strategy should resemble more the Canadian strategy. That is to show them that we can retaliate, that we can focus on those Republican states or those regions that trade the most with Mexico. And those regions are some of the richest economies in the south of the US, like California and Texas. And the whole south of the US, in fact. Mexico is the first trading partner of all the states in the south of the US. So from there, the Mexican government could exert pressure. I think the efforts of the Mexican government trying to convince congressmen and businessmen in the US are going in the right direction. But it's not only about mentioning the carrot, but also to warn them that, you know, there are other ways to negotiate. And those other ways are also typified under the North American Agreement and the World Trade Organization. Mexico has the possibility to retaliate, and that's in fact what businessmen from the steel and aluminum sector are demanding to the Mexican government to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum. So as a summary, I would combine the strategies. I would warn that there will be not only a B plan, but there will be very specific sanctions, very specific retaliatory measures against the same sectors they are affecting. You know, the Mexican people in the social networks are, for example, demanding to impose visas on all Americans. That's something never happened before. This animadversity against Mexico and Mexicans has resulted in an increase of nationalism. And since you already have some problems associated with, at least that's a public perception, with the presence of Americans in Mexico City, for instance, gentrification. Still, public perception is that due to the American presence, prices are going up. And that's the reason why Airbnb is also buying more properties everywhere. So there are lots of voices in the social network demanding Americans to leave. Because as it happens in any other country, people need to blame someone and people need to find scapegoats. And in this case, it's the Americans. So that's not convenient for integration. If something became really helpful in terms of integration in Europe, if something really cemented integration in Europe for so many years, was the fact that there were common values which cemented a common identity. So if distrust increases, cooperation will be more difficult to achieve. What we need is to increase interchanges, to increase the knowledge of the other, to promote all sorts of ties between Mexico and the US, Canada and Mexico. Nowadays, Mexico is, for example, discovering Canada, and Canada likewise. And this threat coming from Trump is uniting Mexican and Canadian citizens. So we should work along those lines. How to enhance cooperation, how to promote interchanges, how to decrease distrust, how to manage those narratives, those political narratives that demonize the other, how to counter those narratives to really cement cooperation. From my point of view, that's the real challenge all governments in the Americas have in front at a very difficult time. It's not through distrust that we are gonna defeat organized crime or drug trafficking. It is through trust. One of the reasons why TGNs are very successful is because there is trust. Members trust each other, and that's cemented cooperation. When Russia was expelled of the E8, it is because there were no more trust on the Russians. And in the case of the health issue area, I once asked high civil servants about the reason why Russia wasn't a member of the GHSI, the Global Health Organization, the Global Health Security Initiative. And they all agreed, irrespective of their country of origin, and I talked to American, Canadians, Mexicans, Italians, and they all agreed that the reason why Russia was never invited, it's because the G7 doesn't trust Russia. And I'm talking about a period, a moment in which Russia hasn't annexed the Crimean Peninsula. I'm talking of the good, happy moments when the G7 and Russia used to collaborate on various fronts, including health. Nonetheless, the G7 members decided not to incorporate Russia into the global health security initiative. And the reason was the distrust, the prevailing distrust towards Russia.
So we've covered so far a lot of the regional dynamics when it comes to Mexico and the Americas, and we've also talked about some other models of organizations such as the BRICS that can be implemented here, at least in terms of their principles of cooperation. Now, let's zoom in a little further on Mexico. You have a new president that you've spoken about, Claudia Sheinbaum, and we also have the idea that domestic political trends can influence regional integration. What are the key domestic political trends in Mexican politics today? What should we be watching for? And how do you think they might actually influence some of the international politics in the region?
Well, one of those issues, the judiciary reform and the implementation of that reform, as you probably know, there will be elections this summer for the judiciary. And I say we should be attentive because Mexico will be the first country, the first big country in terms of population, and the first of the biggest economies worldwide to elect judges and members of the Supreme Court. Of course, that will be a challenge by itself. You know, Mexicans will have to vote for 1,000 positions because half of the judiciary will be renewed in the coming months. That's going to be a challenge. But it's not only because it will be a challenge that we should be attentive to happenings in that area, but we should also be attentive because, you know, it's a whole experiment. We're not only talking about electing some positions, but we are talking about democracy. We are talking about the foundations of democracy. The current government has tried to install the narrative that because of that, Mexico will be more democratic than consolidated democracies. Whereas in fact, we're losing because judges were appointed in the majority of the cases, not because of the ties they had with powerful people, but because of their merits. They had to study a lot. They had to pass very demanding examinations. It was a civil service, so to say, in which they had to continuously climb the ladder. They had to continuously pass new examinations. And they had to meet certain criteria. Whereas now, anyone with a law title was entitled to participate in the elections. And the way to select those who will actually appear on the ballots were in fact drafted through a tombola. the system was similar, and the system was reproduced within the Chamber of Deputies. So it was a circus. We should be attentive of how this evolves in the next months, what the result of the elections is, who are those judges, who are the ones who finance their campaigns, who are the politicians behind those candidates, what are their ties, for example, to organized crime, including drug lords. That already happens in Mexican political campaign. But of course, it could be even more disastrous when it comes to the judiciary. So imagine a judge that was appointed by a drug lord. Of course, in the past months and years, criminals used to buy those judges to get their liberty. But now we're talking that those judges will own their position to businessmen, politicians, and eventually drug lords. So what sort of justice, procurement, and implementation we will have under this new framework? We should be attentive to this because, as you know, ideas and norms travel. And since there are other left-oriented governments in the region, I do not discount a contagion between leftist governments. And that has already happened in Colombia. In the previous months, precisely this topic has been under discussion in Colombia, because Petro, who was inspired by this reform promoted by López Obrador, because it's, I call it the evil heritage Claudia Sheinbaum got from the previous government, Petro got inspired by this initiative, which eventually became a reform and an approved reform. Petro has been trying to install in the idea of the Colombians that that's what they also need, because judges stop most of his initiatives. And he has realized that's probably one of the best ways to circumvent judges or the judiciary. This idea, by the way, as you may know, was an original idea of López Obrador, but of Evo Morales' government, which also belongs to the left. So that's another reason why we should be attentive to the implementation of this reform. It could well happen that if successful, not for the country, not for democracy, but for those in power, might be replicated somewhere else.
That's really a fascinating insight, and it's true that norms do travel across borders. So this does sound like a plausible scenario where other countries might take inspiration from what happens in Mexico and adopt similar reforms. Now, as we move towards the end of the podcast, let me ask you about some recommendations for our audience. Latin American politics is a vast field. It's difficult to navigate it, especially because the literature might be in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. It's based on research being done on several continents, North America, Europe, of course, Latin America, South America as well. So based on your research and experience, if you had to recommend some essential resources, let's say, to a colleague or a student who is getting into researching Latin American politics or integration, these could be books, papers, databases, experts, media channels, even documentaries. What would these resources be?
As you said, it is difficult to navigate throughout the Latin American landscape due to the diversity of resources and the language barrier. I have confronted myself this challenge when trying to understand Brazilian politics, for example, or Brazilian culture. There is indeed a divide and a very diverse scenario. I would suggest those interested in Latin America to focus on some of the newest productions, movies and serials that may help you to understand the complexities of a never-changing region, a region that at times seems more ideology-oriented or more revolutionary than other regions. And for that, I would suggest you some books and some movies and serials, such as El Conde is a Chilean movie, which you can find on Netflix. It's about Pinochet. It's black humor, and Pinochet has managed to survive. He's not dead and became a vampire. Despite of the fact that this story is a black comedy, it helps you understand what Chileans went through throughout the dictatorship. Some of you may think, well, that's past history. I can read about it. Yeah, you could read about it, but it's not just history. Most of the political happenings in the last years in Chile, which are also linked to the accession of the extreme right worldwide, are linked to the experience they had under dictatorship. And that film portrays as how alive are those ideas, but also those crimes, those political crimes that hasn't had an answer, a response from the Chilean government. And the same could be said of many other Latin American governments, particularly in South America, when it comes to the dictatorship. There are countries which have dealt relatively well with that experience. Argentina is one of them. But still, there are pending issues. And there are still politicians like Cast in Chile who are adamant of coming back to the old practices. Or politicians like Bolsonaro who praise the dictatorship and who regard dictatorship as one of the best moments in the history of their countries. That would be one of the films I would suggest you when it comes to journals, magazines. There is Foreign Affairs in Spanish, which is edited by ITAM, which is a Mexican private university. Usually, scholars and practitioners alike write in foreign affairs in Espanol. I would suggest you to follow a journalist called Carmen Aristegui. She has her own platform and she has a radio program. There's also a magazine called Proceso that gives a detailed account of Mexican and Latin American politics. When it comes to Mexican movies, if you want to understand the intricacies of Mexican politics, there are various, like El Infierno or La Ley de Herodes, which talk about how corrupted the system is, the political parties, etc. And which talk also about drug lords, etc., but not from a Hollywood perspective, from a closer perspective. There are as well films that talk about the various tragedies associated with the fight against the drugs, or about, for example, the Madres Buscadoras, those mothers who are looking for their children or the rest of their children. And most of them, you can find them in the Latin American section in Netflix or Mexican movies. And there are, of course, very relevant writers and poets to understand the complex relationship, for example, between Mexico and the US. I recommend a tale written by Carlos Fuentes, which is called La Frontera de Cristal, the Crystal Border. It is very illustrative of the interdependencies between Mexico and the US. It's not only about how close are the economies of these two countries, but how close and how linked the societies of these two countries are. And it is that moment when we understand how societies are deeply interconnected, when we understand why the relationship between the US and Mexico is so complex, and it's not easy to disentangle. There are other books, of course. Another writer who may help you understand Latin American thought is of course, the Uruguayan Eduardo Galeano, and one of his most important books, Las Venas Abiertas de América Latina, which talks about how foreign companies have exploited Latin American countries and Latin American resources throughout the years. And of course, you can read some other books by Borges, Octavio Paz, Gabriela Mistral, Pablo Neruda. And if you wanna read new authors, there is a Brazilian writer whose name is Natalia Polesso. She's excellent. And of course, you find other voices throughout the Latin American landscape. Those would be my suggestions.
Well, these are some wonderful recommendations, and I'm really glad that you mentioned some of the latest series as well, and movies that people can watch, as well as novels, especially because most of our previous guests have focused on recommendations from the academic literature. So I hope that your recommendations will appeal especially to the younger part of our audience that's perhaps more drawn to audiovisual resources and stories and narratives. Now, as we are closing up our conversation, let me ask you about your current research and your future upcoming projects as well. what publications or initiatives or research projects are you working on, and what should we expect to see from you in the future?
Nowadays, I'm working on two projects. One is related to populist and the management of the COVID pandemic. I'm comparing how the different leaders worldwide manage the pandemic, and I'm of course focusing more on those populist leaders that had terrible results in terms of deaths and contagions, who, by the way, were both from the right and the left. And the other project is focused on neglected diseases. I'm focusing on one sickness that is affecting the northwest of Mexico. It's actually a disease that originated in the U.S., and it is a disease that has been affecting the two countries. It is regarded as a neglected disease, meaning governments do not invest lots of resources to conduct research, to produce medicine or vaccinations. I'm reflecting not only on things related to public health, but along the lines of the book written by Susan Sontag about cancer, tuberculosis, and then the book she wrote on AIDS. I'm talking about the perception of those who got infected, how they deal with the sickness, how are they perceived by the others, by the neighbors, by society at large, how they dealt with their deaths, because the mortality rate is high, is about 40%. And it's also a disease that mainly affects those who live in the slums, those who have not access to sanitation, water, who have no medical facilities nearby.
Wow, these are some fascinating projects, and it sounds like they might have very real implications when it comes to perhaps policy recommendations. So I'm looking forward to them very much, and I hope that our audience is looking forward to reading about them as well. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, Octavio. Your insights have shed light on a lot of important issues in Latin American politics and politics across the America. And I hope that we can talk to you again soon. Thanks very much again, and it's been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure, Ivo. Thanks a lot.